Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the news behind the news with Ralph Kintab on Mix 94.7 FM. And as stated yesterday, this week, we're going to be speaking to various leaders in our society, from politics to business. And I have here with me an industry leader, Mr. Imran McSood Amjad. Sorry, I didn't want to mess up your first name, Mr. Imran McSood Amjad. Yeah. And good afternoon, sir, and thank you so much for coming on the program.
Good afternoon. But most people call me McSood or Max, so that's fine.
Okay, all right. So today I would like to talk about, yourself, as well as the businesses that you've built, to get a better understanding of, let's say the best practices that you've utilized to gain the success that you had. But also, St. Martin is in a situation it's never been like before. And one that one can say may be very risky, very challenging. And I think, your contribution would be helpful in helping people to gauge, what we can expect in the future, but also maybe share some solutions as to what we can do to move forward. But before we begin, some people know your story, some don't. I don't necessarily. And so my first question to you is, what was your motivation for coming to St. Martin, and what about the island made you want to make it home?
Well, I'll try to be brief on that because a lot of people have asked me to do a book on on my early years and coming to St. Martin. But very briefly, I was first a school teacher for just a year and bit, but a highly successful one. And eventually I got into the insurance business through a neighbor who was a medical advisor to an insurance company. And he saw me teaching kids when I was just 17. And I used to bring these kids home from school to teach them in the evenings and give additional classes because I was quite determined that the kids must succeed. If I am the teacher, if they fail, then it's more my fault than theirs. At least I had that kind of thinking. And so I used to bring them home by me in the evenings to give extra lessons because they were a group of children that were getting close to 18. Some of them were a bit older than me. And it was their last chance to get through primary school into secondary school. So I used to do that. And this neighbor, who was a chief medical officer for an insurance company, he saw me teaching these kids and the passion by which I was doing it and how engaged the students were. And then he approached me and said, I really admire what you're doing. You disturb my sleep in the afternoon, but I admire what you do. But teaching, I'm from Guyana, as you know. Teaching in Guyana was one of the lowest paid profession, along with being a police constable, And he said, you could stay a long time in this teaching profession, but you'll never be able to do well financially and so on. So if you would like, I'd like you to think about working for this insurance company. And the long and short of it is there's a whole thing I can go into with that, but I went for the interview successfully and joined the insurance business. But immediately after I joined, I wasn't satisfied to just be the average employee. I wanted to understand the business inside out. I studied it. I became the youngest chartered insurer in the Caribbean at the time, and I was a chartered insurer. And I was doing quite well. I was promoted to management when I was approached with the possibility of running an insurance company that was starting from the scratch. And this came through a friend of mine who was working in Trinidad, as well as the principal of the Academy of Insurance in Trinidad, who I had a good relationship with. I used to co-lecture insurance courses with him. And I was just around 24 at the time. And And he called me and said, there's this opportunity. So I contacted then a guy by the name of Cleveland Beresford, who I was told to speak to, which I did. And I came to St. Martin, incidentally, in 2 weeks' time, would be 40 years ago. So in December, just the week before Christmas, so around the middle of December, 1981, I came to St. Martin and met with the group of business people who had this idea of forming an insurance company but lacked the expertise. And the reinsurers in London, they were saying that unless you get a chartered insurer or somebody at least 10 years in the business who understands the insurance and the reinsurance side, we can't provide you with reinsurance. So I came, I had the interview, and they felt I was quite young, quite baby-faced, but I seemed to know what I was doing. So from here we left and went to Curacao and met with the then Minister of Finance in Curacao, as the Ranger Martina at the time, the brother of Don Martina, past Prime Minister, and met with the central bank. And within a couple of weeks, I was told that all the license approval would be given and I should make my way back to St. Martin. So I came back to St. Martin with my wife and then a 1-year-old son in January 1982, and opened Nagico's offices on the 2nd of February 1982. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Gotcha. Okay. So even in that history, there's a few things I'm curious about. When you were teaching, was it general ed courses or any specific field?
Yes. Well, in those days, there were you're familiar with GCE and CXC?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you do CXC. Most people, as you finish high school or secondary school, you do CXC, and once you pass a certain grade, you can move on, colleges, blah, blah, blah. Before you go to secondary school, you have to go through primary school. And most students will get into secondary school by passing what is then called common entrance. Right? Yep. That's what they were calling it at the time. And you do that between the age generally of 11 and 12. If you fail to do that, you then have an opportunity, at least in the Guyana system, to do something called PC, which is a preliminary certificate. So people who fail common entrance have another opportunity to do to get a preliminary certificate, and if they pass that and they get that certificate, it gives them an entrance into secondary school. So that's the second chance, basically. So it's not like in some countries, if you don't make it past common entrance, well, you go to technical school or something. You can't make it anymore. And then there is a third and last chance in that system at that time. I don't know the system now. I've left there 40 years now. So the last chance is for people who are not yet 18, they should still remain in school based on the Guyanese educational legal system. So they would then have this last chance to do something called CP, which is College of Preceptors. And in CP, you do subjects in identically the same way as you do as GCE or now CXE.
Gotcha.
Except it's of a lower level. So you do all the subjects just the same. You do commerce, you do art, you do, but except in CP, mathematics were distributed as 3 subjects. It was arithmetic, algebra, and geometry as 3 separate subjects. And then you have literature, and you have religious knowledge, and which people call scriptures, and so on. And I mean, I can go on and on.
Gotcha.
But you could do up to 12 subjects if you want. So if the students pass that CP, then they will go to secondary school. And the students, therefore, that I was teaching at the time were all students who failed at common entrance, failed at PC, So you could imagine it would be very difficult to get them to pass to go to secondary school. But I was very determined. I don't know, it probably came from a young age that I take responsibility to see these kids do better in life. And I would bring these kids home and teach them. They were what you call almost ready for complete failure. And I had to, there were 19 students in the class.
You had to reverse
at the
that.
time, right? And I had to reverse that. I had to teach them. And I also had to get into their minds that Guyana at the time had a lot of race implications. And I, obviously, as of Indian ethnic origin, and out of the 19 students, 17 were of African origin. So you had to cross that hump as well to get into the mind for these. So one was only one Indian in that 19 students. So you have to cross these hurdles. But I was young, but I think pretty wise for my age. I always felt so. My father always said that I'm always way ahead of my age. And I made the dedication to teach these people. And I succeeded in getting 18 of the 19 into secondary school. And actually, my school won the award that year for best performance at CP. So that's my short history.
Gotcha. So something else that comes to mind is when you grew up in Guyana, that was during the time of burnout, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How was that like?
It was tough.
Yeah.
Yes. Guyana was going through a very rough period. It was one of the reasons why a lot of people were trying to leave Guyana at the time, of all political persuasions, because it was just purely difficult to get simple basic things like butter. Even bread, if you don't get early in the morning to line up, it was pretty difficult. Now, I was fairly comfortable because first I come from farmlands, so my family owned farms. You can get things to eat fairly easily.
You can make your own products as well.
Exactly. Secondly, I had a good job as the manager, so I could afford some of the black marketing that was going on. But it was still tough. Sometimes you could afford to buy the things, but you can't get the things. Yeah. Right? It's just not available.
Yeah.
My son Reza, we always tease Reza up to now that, he has a different way to think than us sometimes because, he grew up not on the normal baby formula, but on Nido milk. So, but my kids are all, healthy, well-educated, and have done very well in life. So when the opportunity came, I was driven more by the need for my family, my wife and kid, than I was driven by myself. Because I, as a 24-year-old, becoming the youngest manager in the history of an insurance company called GTM. And years later, I would buy the GTM from Trinidad. So that's quite a story in itself. Right? Yes. But I was doing well. I was comfortable as a manager. I was making good money. I could have even get a loan at very low terms from my company to buy a house. I was okay. But the situation at the time was not very good. We were moving not... first we had moved from a more free market situation into what was then considered socialism and a socialist philosophy. But then we moved to more of a kind of a nationalist and communist philosophy. Correct. And that was not helping the country, in my view. It was not helping the people, in my view. And people were simply struggling. You have to join a line for basic food items. And I didn't see the chance of, if something happens to me, how would my wife and child make out under these conditions?
Correct.
So, that's how it was. And another day we'll talk
No
about
problem.
political philosophy.
I was just curious though, because I've read up on Burnham and when he decided to nationalize things, and Guyanese more national focus in terms of national products and stuff, but the implications afterwards were terrible.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't realize, but Burnham and the main competitor at the time, Jagan of the PPP, they were actually, Burnham actually came out of the Jagan school of thought. Mm-hmm. So it was not accidental that he moved into the Jagan school of thought, of more socialism. There is question mark as to whether Jagan was a communist. He was more a Marxist, which seems to be more of socialism rather than communism. And as I said, someday we will discuss that differently. But yes, he came from that school. And I have remarked that, yes, maybe both of these guys have caused some difficulties to Guyana. Forbes with his different agenda. Jagan was quite happy to sit back and see, at least in my view, and see Forbes move the country under a fairly Marxist direction. Mm-hmm. So not a hell of a lot of opposition from him either. Mm-hmm. But I have always said that both of these guys did a lot of good for Guyana. And they don't realize, and a lot of people don't realize, in what way they did a lot of good for Guyana. They did a lot of bad as well, but isn't that human nature, right? But they did a lot of good from the perspective that they felt that a development of the people, the people of Guyana, were more important than the commercial interests in Guyana at the time. One would argue that they probably tried to do that too exclusively. Yeah. And it should be much more engaging and balanced. But that's another topic. Yeah. But they did a lot of good because of that. I tell people, for example, that when I joined the same GTM insurance company, I joined in 1975. But it was surprising to know that the first person of Indian origin to work in the GTM insurance company in a clerical position was in 1965 for a company that was 100 years old. So what happened? Why wouldn't they employ people and of different dimensions, So Guyana had that difficulty where most business and industry was controlled by Europeans. And like I said, there's a discussion as to how you move from one scenario to another. But at least they built a certain nationalistic view. They made education free for all. Yeah. They made this same compulsory education that I was just speaking about, where children must not leave school until they're 18, regardless.
To the extent that till presently, Guyanese students still perform almost the best in CXC.
Oh yes. So they built an education. So people like myself benefited of that philosophy, that direction, and that feeling of get educated and serve your country. That kind of thinking happened. But along the way, they also lost the point that you cannot do these things at the detriment of business. Correct. Because at the end of the day, the economy is driven by business. Correct. So there is that. Correct. That difference. Yeah. So the conversation took a little turn with that because I realized. Well, you asked me.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, that's during the independence era, and Walter Rodney, somebody else just came to mind.
Yeah. Well, you're well informed.
That's my field. But like you said, that would be another discussion. Yeah. So speaking of commercial interests, then one of the things I definitely would like for you to touch on is, of course, how exactly you built Nagico to where it is today. And I guess my first question for you is in relation to building networks and relationships, to help establish a company. And I ask that because, I know that you would often refer to reinsurers. And so can you detail, your approach to pitching your company and getting support and building networks, that led to it being taken to another level?
Right. So the key to me about any business, and maybe you might ask me that later, but is understanding the business. You must have a pretty good understanding of the business that you're working in, or you're running, or you are entering. So at the time there was I would say the insurance knowledge rested mostly in me. We had a couple of staff that were working there, but they didn't have much of the insurance knowledge. We had another guy of Dutch origin but lived in England that came to assist in reinsurance, but unfortunately he was in his 60s, and during the very short, he just lasted a year by us, and during that year he contracted cancer and died soon after. So a lot of this was left upon me. First, you have to teach the people. I mean, business is all about people. And first, the people that work for you, and then the people that you work for.
Yeah.
Right? In a nutshell, the customers that we call customers out there, actually, a good business person should quickly realize that you work for that customer. Right, and the people who we call employees work for you. So therefore, I would say that I was very focused on growing this company. I understood the business very well. We didn't have much capital. I tell people repeatedly that we started Nagico with a mere $75,000 in the bank. You don't start insurance companies with that kind of money, but it's what I had. I could complain that we should have $500,000 in case a storm happens, but you have to manage what you have. So it meant that we had to do more reinsurance than we need to. But the more reinsurance you do, the more money you're giving to somebody else as well, right? So if I had more money, I can take more risk and reinsure less. If I don't have enough money, I can't take as much risk. I have to reinsure more, but that means I have to pay more of the income I bring to the reinsurer. Mm-hmm. Of course, if there is a catastrophe, they chip in and they help to pay you, and if nothing happens, your profit keep growing, hopefully, as you grow the business. So that is the way the insurance business works. But the business is all about relationships. You hit the nail on the head there. The relationship you have with the people that work with you is vitally important. The relationship that you have with clients and customers, vitally important. The relationship you have with, in this case, suppliers. If you think of basic business, you have to think that the reinsurer is like a supplier, right? And you were like a retailer, right? So that's the way you have to look at it. And your relationship with the reinsurer is vitally important.
Gotcha.
I understood that very well. And I think I either had the personality, but I think more importantly, I had the sense of imagination, the sense of understanding of the business. And I guess part of my nature is that I build good relationships. People who know me get to understand that and like working with me and like being around me. You know, I've once said to people that I see some people make some critical comments about me, and I once told a friend about a year ago who was telling me about this, and I said, well, you know, almost everybody who I've seen written something negative about me have never sat with me for 5 minutes. So they have no idea who I am. They have no idea who I think and what I intend and what I want to do. But you pass judgment based on some thing based on your own mentality or your own thinking. But at the end of the day, I felt that I was pretty good at building employee loyalty. And the two staff I was telling you that lasted from the beginning, one retired a couple of years ago and the other one is still working with Nagico. So that sense of loyalty is still there. The reinsurers that have been working with us for decades, even with all the losses from Hurricanes Lewis and Marlin and Irma, so they're still there supporting Nagico, right? Because of that relationship that was built over the years. We have several agents, brokers, and so on, and their staff all over the St. Martin and the whole Caribbean. And the relationship that we have built at Nagico with all these people are pretty good, pretty sound, and working very well. And then, of course, you have to manage your finances. Good financial management is key for any business, and more so a financial institution. And I try to ensure that we do that. And, because of that, we keep growing.
Okay. So something that stood out to me was when you spoke about how much you started with and what you had to do to work around with distributing more to get more reinsurers to assist you. Now, a common issue many have when they go into business is, of course, gaining capital. So what would you say for someone, considering one of the main things I think you've repeated yourself, and I think stands out is knowing your business. I think you've made that clear. So from knowing your business to now needing capital, what would you say? What advice would you give someone as far as getting to that next step of getting that injection you need to grow and really execute the vision that you have?
Right. So a lot of people believe that if you have sufficient money to start a business today, then you can start this business and it will succeed. What a lot of people didn't realize, like what I did at Nagico from the day one, I realized how much money I had, and I realized that I need to plan according to that money. And I also made a 3-year plan of where we are going to be. And up to today, every year Nagico has to put out a 3-year plan. It's been going on for decades, right? And that 3-year plan is still there. In a meeting I had with some of my staff last week, for example, we spoke about a new business. And one of the things I said to them was that most new business only start to turn a profit after about 3 years. A lot of people believe that they can go into the business and make it work immediately. And that is the cause of many people to fail, because it doesn't necessarily happen that way unless you find some magic business that can bring the income and you have the people trained enough to supply the services. But that is quite rare. Most business, you have to put in money, or you call it capital. For me, money and capital are similar but not the same.
True.
You have to then plan for a 3-year period. And in that 3-year period, you have to now think what's going to happen year 1, year 2, year 3. You need planning, right? A lot of people don't do the planning. Or some people come to me with all kinds of great ideas, but they're not telling me what will happen over a 3-year period, because in my mind, it will take about 3 years for your capital or money that you invest to start returning back to you without relying on that capital. Continue to rely on that capital. Now, there are many sources of capital, as you know. You could either get capital from a bank. You can get capital from the government. Some governments do that. You have small enterprises. You have now, after Hurricane Irma and RPB, there are people who are going there to get money as well. So governments can provide capital. Banks provide capital. Family can provide capital. So, you have to get the buy-in from your family to provide that capital. And some people, if they're smart enough, they get into business after they have built up some capital of their own, right? But to me, one of the most important ways to raise this capital and this money, assuming that you don't have a bank willing to give it to you, you don't have a government willing to give it to you, you don't have a family willing to give it to you, the best way is therefore through partnerships. You have to bring something to the table, and you work in a partnership where somebody, or you, let's say you want to start a business, one must assume that if you intend to start a business, it's not just a pipe dream, but because you have some thought, some project in mind that you think will work, that you have the expertise to make it work. You have the knowledge, the expertise about this thing, this product, this service, this thing that you can market, right? But you don't have the money. So that's where partnerships come in. You need to find a partner who will provide the money, and you provide those services. And there are times when I have done that. In the case of Nagico, for example, Nagico was not started with me being the provider of the funds. No, we had a group of St. Martiners that provide the funds, and I had a share of the profits, and over the years my profits grew, and eventually they wanted out, and I had to get other partners to buy in, and so on. It's a long story. But basically, Nagico was started through a partnership where people provide money and I provided expertise. Right? So that is key in the business. So if you go to somebody for money, for example, you have to be very clear in your mind what you are bringing to the table, and not that you have a pipe dream of becoming rich, so you go to somebody for money. No, what are you bringing to the table? And sometimes it might not be that you are bringing something to the table, but you know someone who has the expertise. So it could be someone you know, but you are still providing that expertise because it's expertise that is known to you and not known to the person providing the capital. Right? So Nagico was that way. When I started the car rental business, I had a partner, so it was reverse. Right? So in the car rental business, we started with one car. Today we have hundreds. But we started with one car. What happened in that situation? I provided the money. And my partner, so I have another partner that provided the knowledge and the expertise. And of course, between myself and my wife, we are good managers. We have good management philosophies and business ethics, which we can talk about. But we provided the capital, some degree of management, and my partner provided the know-how. And we grew the business until such point that my partner wanted to go on his own, and he went on his own, and we proceeded on our own, and the world continues. But both have been fairly successful. One more successful than another, because we're not all the same and we don't think the same. And when you take out one partner, sometimes you take out something. In this case,
in the equation,
you take out the money, and you take out the management skill. And for us, we lost the know-how. But there is a saying: if you have enough money and enough capital, you could always hire the know-how. So there is the difference.
Okay, appreciate that.
Yeah.
So the next thing that definitely comes to mind is stewardship. I like that you emphasize there that your wife and yourself and your wife, you have good management skills. And one thing that comes into mind where that is concerned is also negotiating. Because you spoke about how beneficial partnerships can be, and partnerships can also get ugly, whether it's relational and in business. But from your experience and standpoint, I guess how would someone approach, you have this great idea you want, and you may pitch to an investor, let's say, but at the same time, you don't necessarily want to give up too much,
right,
of the venture that you want to create, but you don't have, you just don't have the capital or the money. So in that case, how do you negotiate where both parties can win?
Okay. First, I would say my overriding principle over the years, I have not been in some of the business minds, the Warren Buffetts and so school of thought. I always believe that if something, and I tell this to my kids all the time, if you ask them, they will hear me say it, if the business formula is good enough that it can last 3 years and beyond, if it's in an industry or a sector where you can create enough of a moat, not necessarily a monopoly, but a moat, if it can make sufficient profits for me, then if that business has all of those things, then if it is that you want to spend $10, then there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't give up 11, right? So, because the business is sufficient there. I have always believed that when you are trying to build a business and you need the other person because you're unable to get your feet in the door, so to speak, right? You must be able to give up more. There is almost no such thing as an exactly equal situation, unless you're talking strictly about money. But if we are going to give 50% and you have 50%, but you are doing most of the work and I am staying in the background, at some point you will be thinking, but we are both putting 50% and I am getting 50%, but you're doing all the work. Now that's a recipe for disagreement instantaneously, right? It then boils down to what is valued more. So if you say to me that the business is such that I really desperately need the money, and without the money I can't get into the business, then the equation is not exactly the same, because is it really 50-50? Well, my argument to you would be, no, it is not exactly 50-50, because you value the money for the business, right? In this equation, the money for the business is more valuable than the expertise you are bringing, because the expertise you are bringing could remain on the shelf or sink in the ocean if you don't have the money. So any attempt to try to negotiate a deal like that, when you know, and you must make that evaluation, that the money is more needed at this point, right, than your expertise, then you have to be prepared to give up more, right? Because you're not the same. Because the money is more vital. If, on the other hand, the person wants to invest in a business and you have the know-how, then you can negotiate terms where you have the upper hand, because there, in that scenario, the money is not the most important thing. It is the expertise that you're looking for, right? So And we can go into the Microsofts and Googles of the world and Facebook of the world where this formula has worked exactly that way. There's no such thing as equal partnerships as such, right? It's a matter of understanding which is more important and who is going to give up more. Now, there is a way to balance the equation going down the road, which is the similar agreement I made, for example, with my people at my previous partners at Nagico, and that is, I am bringing the great expertise. I need your money, and here's what is going to happen. I will start out taking less, but on condition that if I produce what we say we are going to produce, then you will give me more. So there are situations where you could be 50-50, but actually the other party makes more. I have certain arrangements, for example, where I'm 60%, right, of a business, and the other party is 40% of the business, but I am telling you that that 40% person or partner has made more money out of the business than I. Why? Because I've made the calculation that the 60% was mainly for me to ensure I manage the decision and direction. But I couldn't make the money without the person, right? And therefore I was willing to pay that person a salary, willing to pay that person dividends, willing to pay that person bonuses and incentives for them to succeed, and then we will split whatever profits are made 60-40. And if the company grows in equity value, then I will have more value because I'm 60%. But in the meantime, and over a period of 10 plus years, that person, if they add all that they have made and all that I have made, they have done far better. And I am 60%.
Yeah.
So my point is, in negotiation, you have to work out what is most valuable at the time. And then you give more. And if you negotiate properly, you could make a deal where if your efforts produce more, you get rewarded more. That's what I would say.
Okay. Thanks for that answer.
Yeah.
What also comes to mind with that is definitely thinking long term, and playing the long game to extent.
You have to play the long game, I mean, short game is going to a casino.
Yeah.
I tell people, if you want to make $10,000 overnight, well, take a chance at the casino. Right? But if you're going to do a business, be prepared for it to take 3 years.
Yeah.
And you have to have patience and you have to have tenacity. But people underestimate how long 3 years is. And some people also underestimate how short it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it depends. If you are anxious to get instantaneous rewards, 3 years is a very long time. But if you are prepared to get rewards that are measured over a period of time, then 3 years is not a long time.
It's an easy way, indeed. Yeah.
It's not a long time. And the casino can offer you instantaneous reward, but it can also provide you with instantaneous poverty.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, that's
whereas a business, if you plan it for 3 years, at least have 3 years to rethink. You can't rethink tomorrow when you finish with that gamble. So therein lies the difference. All business, in my humble opinion, all business is long-term. And anyone who thinks that there is any business that they can get in and get out in a year or so, I think maybe they might be lucky. But 99%, that's not the case.
Okay, so on that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Sure.